Hey ladies and gents, Tony Roslund here in the studio talking about one of the most common questions that I get through the interwebs. Usually it's either about pricing or about gear. So since we are 3/4 of the way through 2019, I thought it was time we talk about what's in my bag because everybody always wants to know. All right, so we're gonna dive into what's in my bag this year. Now, what I want you to remember is that I am an architecture photographer, actually commercial architecture photographer more specifically. And what's in my bag might be quite a bit different than what's in your bag or the tools that you need. But if you are an architecture photographer or you're just kind of curious about what I have in my bag, we're gonna go through it. And I'm gonna show you all of the different stuff in here, the lenses, the body, all the accessories. Now, this is just my bag, like literally the bag. I'm not talking about tripods and laptop holders and all of the other grip kit accessories that come out onto location with me, simply talking about the bag. What was in the box? Starting with the bag. So this is a think tank bag. It is the airport Commuter. Now, I used to use Airport Essentials, I believe it was, also a think tank bag. Essentially the exact same bag, just a little bit narrower in depth. And the reason I moved to this one is because I was using a 5D Mark IV with that Airport Essentials, but when I moved to the 1DX Mark II, I needed the extra depth. So I moved to this bag for that extra depth. Now I'm no longer using the 1DX Mark II. I am now using the EOS R with a grip. So it's essentially the same depth as the 1DX2. So still using a deeper bag. I love think tank bags. They're bomb-proof, they're bulletproof. One of the things I love most are these zippers. They're monster zippers. They're huge tracks. They don't get snagged up. They're not hard to pull. Stuff doesn't get stuck in them. They never break. Love these bags. It reminds me of those old Samsonite commercials where like a gorilla used to be jumping up and down on top of the bags. I feel confident that this bag can handle a gorilla jumping on it, or whoever happens to be handling it. Sometimes the studio assistants act like gorillas and throw stuff around. So let's dig in. Starting in the front pouch, I've got stickers. So if you want a sticker, Do Average Elsewhere sticker, hit us up, leave a comment, hit us up, whatever, we'll get one out to you. There is also this little Pee-wee rocket thing. It's a little memory card holder. I'll show you. Not a lot in there. I don't use memory cards a whole lot. I shoot mostly tethered, so I don't have a lot of use for memory cards. There is one in the camera. There's an extra one in here. That's about all I ever need. And then, you know, pens and things like that. So that's pretty much all that's in the front pocket. Let's jump into the next pocket here and shot list. So this is something that the assistants put together for me. Tim throws this together and it's basically in the bag when we go out on a shoot, and it has all of the shots we need to get, as well as the scout shots from that, and then usually a map of the location on the back. And we can take all of that information when I get onto location, and we know exactly what it is that we're supposed to be shooting for the most part. This goes to the client, they approve it, gets some revisions back and forth. In fact, we should make a video on this thing. So I think maybe we'll do that for YouTube. If you guys are interested, leave a comment. If you want to know how we put together shot lists and how we interact with the client to build a shot list, let me know. Also is my Digi system. This is part of the Inovativ DigiPlate system. This is the DigiShade Light, I believe it's called. This is for a 15-inch MacBook Pro, and essentially it just magnets. There's magnets around the front here. It hooks onto the front of the screen, and it just blocks all the light. I use this all the time. More recently, I've moved to a 13-inch MacBook Pro from a 15-inch MacBook Pro, and so this doesn't fit. I need to get a new one for that. But anyway, that is what I use when I need to block the sun when I'm working on location. I also keep one of my leave-behinds in here. This is just a book that we get printed, and it has like a sample of our work. And so if we go somewhere and we run into a potential client and they're asking questions, I can leave this with them and they can basically see what it is that we do and take it back to their office and talk to everybody else in their office, and hopefully we get hired from it. The other thing that is usually in here, which I don't have in here today, is my actual laptop. Now, as I said, I've been using the 13-inch MacBook Pro, just a very basic, not even a touch bar, just like entry-level basic MacBook Pro 13-inch. I capture into Capture One or tether into Capture One, and this thing does fine for that. I was using a 15-inch MacBook Pro, but it's kind of overkill just for tethered shooting. I was also doing editing on the 15-inch MacBook Pro, but we've got staff here now and stuff that handles most of the edits, so I'm not using it for editing a whole lot. I really just need something to tether to and something that I can communicate with, like email and things like that. The 13-inch MacBook Pro does great for that. So if you're interested in a tethered computer and you don't have a huge budget for like the high-end MacBook Pros or whatever, and you're not going to be doing any editing, I recommend just a entry-level MacBook Pro 13-inch, or even the MacBook Air will handle that task for you. So that's it in that pocket. And let's get into the meat and potatoes here, the inside. So inside this pouch, we have the top pockets here, extra USB cables, USB-C, because the new MacBook Pros are all USB-C and the camera's USB-C. It's mostly USB-C cables in here. These are some extras that I have just in case I need to charge something or whatever. You'll see in here I've got some battery chargers, and we can go over that in a second. I am using the USB-C to USB-C cable. This one actually came with the camera. It's great. Never had any problems with this cord. Got a longer one here. This is like a 10-footer. It's blue, so you don't trip over it. USB-C. This is like a $7 cable on Amazon or something. It's not expensive. You'll notice I don't use the really expensive orange cables that a lot of photographers use. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of problems with those. I have a whole drawer full of them that have failed over the years, and so I don't buy them anymore. For 65 bucks, I don't want my cables to fail. Instead, I buy Cable Matters cables, which is the brand I buy off Amazon. They're like 10 bucks max, and here's an extra that I bought, and it's still in the package. That's how little they fail. They never fail. So I would say maybe look at some alternative options, especially if you've had problems with the more expensive cables. I'll put a link in the description for the cables that I use. In fact, we'll put a link in the description for all of this stuff. And if you're interested in any of it, you'll be able to jump onto Amazon or B&H or whatever and go right to that stuff. You can also check out kit.com/Tony Roslund. We'll throw a thing up on the screen here and a link in the bio. And that has my entire kit, including my strobes and all the equipment that I use in the studio and on location. So if you're interested in seeing everything, jump on kit.com and you can see my entire collection of goodies. Back to what's in the bag. Let's see, digging in. Where should we start? With the camera and lenses or accessories? I think let's jump into the camera. We'll start with the body. Now this is, as I said, the Canon EOS R mirrorless camera. I was a Sony shooter for a while. I've shot Nikon, I've shot Phase 1, I've shot Arca Swiss, I've shot basically everything, and I keep coming back to Canon. The color is so good, and the white balance with auto white balance, white priority, that I just can't find anything else that comes close as far as color. The image quality is phenomenal. This thing is 30 something megapixels. Do you know what this is? 32 megapixels, something, whatever. We'll put the specs if you care. But anyway, plenty of resolution for me. I don't need more than that for anything. So this camera is great, does video if I need it to. I love the focus peaking. I love the electronic viewfinder, little flip out screen that rotates and whatnot. One of the things I did was add the battery grip, because after having the 1DX Mark II, I was spoiled with those giant batteries that it has. And so not having to change the battery all day became a little bit of a luxury. And so I put the battery grip on here, and it actually goes in and out just like the 1DX2 from the side. And so it holds two LPE6 batteries and a sled that goes into the side. And with that setup, I hardly have to ever change the batteries on a shoot. The old ones used to go in on the back, which I didn't like so much. This is a better system to me. Also have the Really Right Stuff L bracket on here. This is allows me to go from horizontal to a vertical orientation without having to adjust my head. I use the Arca Swiss Cube head, which is a ridiculously expensive head that will go vertical, but it's a little bit of a pain in the ass to make it do so. It's easier just to pop this off, turn it, and then hook it back on the tripod and go vertical that way if I need to. So love this camera. These little dongle things here are for a strap that I have. It's a Peak Design strap. So that's all those are if I ever put a strap on the camera, which I hardly do. Let's jump into lenses, shall we? The workhorse here, this is the 24 TS Mark II. This is the lens I probably use the most, 70% of the time or so. In fact, I probably use it more than that with the extender, but this lens is on the camera an awful lot. Super sharp. This is a tilt shift lens. If you're shooting architecture or real estate or whatever, I honestly believe that you need to have tilt shift lenses. I'm not going to go into how they work right now. If you're interested, I do have the full explanation in my tutorial. I'll throw a link down below for that, but I have a tutorial, full-length tutorial on architecture photography. If you want to know more about the subject and how to use tilt shift lenses, I go over that in there. But this 24 is phenomenal. I'll talk about the extender in just a few minutes when I get to that pocket here, but this lens is super sharp, very low distortion, very low chromatic aberration, just an all-around super lens. Another lens I use quite a bit is the 17, and this is the 17 tilt shift. Again, great, super sharp lens, does have some distortion. I use this typically outside more so than inside. I probably wouldn't put a 17 on inside like a bedroom or something like that. It's just going to get way too distorted. It's going to make the bed look huge or anything in the foreground. Where this does come into play is when I want to accentuate or exaggerate overhangs, cantilevered eaves, something like that on an exterior shoot. I can put this on and get up nice and close, and it really amplifies those details, those architectural details, if it's what I'm trying to accomplish. Also outside, I can use this to get a wider view if there's just can't get it all into a 24. But typically the way I go is with the widest or the longest lens possible, and then I'll work through to a closer lens as needed if I have to go wider to get more into the scene. So I'll start, say, with this guy. This is the 50 tilt shift, and if this ends up being too long, I'll go to a 24 with the extender on there, which is equivalent to like a 35. Still too wide, I'll go to the 17. If that's still too wide, I'll go to the 14, and we'll get to all of these in a second. This is it's their latest tilt shift lens from Canon's lineup. It's built like a tank, super, super sharp. I love the fact that it's also a macro lens, because once in a while when I'm shooting hospitality, say a hotel or a restaurant, they'll also ask me to do food shots. And when you're talking about food shots, I believe the 50 millimeter is probably the best lens for that subject. In fact, if you haven't already, check out the Pixel Punishers podcast. If you're into podcasts, jump over there. It's a podcast that my buddy Jed Conklin and I do weekly. Actually, now we're going to do it bi-weekly, but there's a bunch of past episodes you can listen to. One of them we met and discussed with food stylist Susie Eaton about food styling and food photography, and we talked about most used lenses, and the 50 is definitely a front runner for that. So if you're interested, check out the podcast, the Pixel Punishers. And anyway, the 50 is great, nice sharp lens. Because it's a macro, I can get nice and tight on food. I can also use the tilt function if I want to like bring in the whole tabletop into focus if I'm shooting food or something. But really in architecture, this allows me to back up and compress that scene a bit and get some really nice images in architecture. So the other lens that I carry with me is the 14 rectilinear. Now this is just a 14. I think this is their Mark II. It is. This is a 2.8 Mark II. Rectilinear meaning that it keeps everything nice and straight. It's got a big bulbous lens element on the front, but it does keep everything nice and straight, surprisingly straight actually. This lens is really sharp and there's very little distortion considering it's a 14 millimeter. What it does have is a bunch of chromatic aberration on the edges, and it's just something that's easy to correct in post, just like Lightroom or Capture One or whatever software you're using, usually just a tick box and it's gone. So it's not a huge problem. You just have to remember to tackle that in your raw conversion. The thing that I use this for is if I'm shooting large spaces like a convention center or a gymnasium or some kind of large space that doesn't have a whole lot of stuff in the foreground to distort. Because it is a wide angle lens, it's an ultra wide angle lens, it's going to distort anything in the foreground. It's going to make it look huge compared to the stuff that's in the background. But if I'm shooting, again, say in a convention center, I can get the entire convention center floor in a single shot with this lens, and it keeps the edges and everything nice and straight. It doesn't get them all barrel distorted and everything. It's a great little lens. Super expensive for as often as I use it. It's very rare that I use it, but when you need it, it's nice to have. So Let's jump into some more stuff here in the bag. Up in the front, I have a remote. This is just a very simple, cheap remote. You can buy these on Amazon. It is the Pixel Oppilas, whatever, I can't even pronounce the thing. We'll put a link in the show note or the description down below. If I need to tether to or remote trigger the camera, I can do that with this. It has a couple different modes, single shot, bulb mode, timer mode, etc. I can set that up and fire the camera remotely. This thing works like, most of the time.
60% of the time, it works every time.
Next is my Profoto trigger. Now this is the universal Profoto trigger. I had the Canon specific one, but the TTL involved in that whole thing was messing me up, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. It kept adjusting my exposures, and I realized it was because the trigger is a TTL trigger, and so it kept telling the camera to change exposure to compensate for stuff, and I didn't want it to do that. Thanks to Jason Rayner, shout out to Jason for explaining what was happening and convincing me to buy the universal Profoto Air remote rather than the TTL version. Solved all my problems, so love this. This triggers all my Profoto strobes, which is the type of strobe that I use when I'm shooting anything, so that comes in real handy. Below that is the Canon RF to EF adapter. This is just a very simple adapter. There's no glass in it. It's just a plain electronics pass-through. Essentially, this allows you to adapt the EF mount to the RF body, and carries through all of the electronics with it, such as all your metering and all of the stuff that happens from autofocus, etc., etc. It gives you the right space between the sensor and the lens, kind of like a Metabones adapter or whatever that you guys may be familiar with from other brands. Canon released this when they came out with the RF bodies. They pretty much give it away with most of the cameras. If you watch like B&H or whatever for a deal, it'll say includes free $99 adapter or whatever. This is what they're talking about. They make some that have drop-in filters and slots and things like that, which I don't really have a need for that stuff. I have a different system for filters and things. I'll show that to you in just a minute, but just keep in mind that there are some other options. This is a little Bose portable speaker. It's the micro something or rather, I don't know. We'll put a link again in the description. Got it at Amazon. It does a great job. It's nice and loud. It's nice and small. Hardly ever have to charge this thing. And you always, you got to have Nelly Furtado jamming on set or else it's just not a good shoot day. Next, we have the Canon Extender, the EF 1.4 Mark III. So this is what I was talking about with the 24. This basically takes your focal length and multiplies it 1.4. So this 24 with this adapter on here becomes essentially a 35 millimeter, and it adds a little bit of distortion. It also eats up about a stop of light or so, but it gives me just a little bit longer focal length. I could use it technically on the 17, but that would bring it out to equivalent of a 24, in which case I would just use the 24. So this thing I use a lot on the 24. It's either just the 24 or the 24 with the 1.4, probably 90% of my shooting time. Moving on. I talked about this little guy. This is another thing by Think Tank. This is their DSLR battery holder 4. The cool thing about this is that we load them up, and then when we use the battery, we swap it out. It goes in reversed, and then everybody on my team knows that that's a dead battery, and we don't grab it and try to stick that one back in the camera and waste a bunch of time putting dead batteries in the camera. So it's kind of nice to be able to keep them organized that way. I talk about this on my 5 tips to studio bag zen or whatever the heck the video. We'll put it up somewhere, and you guys can check that video out if you haven't seen it. Handy little things. This is the RAVPower. This is like a 26,800 milliamp battery, 26,800. This is pretty cool. This will basically give me another 100% of my laptop battery life. In fact, when I was using the 15-inch MacBook Pro, this guy would give me a whole nother 100% worth of battery, as long as you catch it before it goes dead. If the computer goes completely dead, this doesn't have the power to bring it back from the dead. It still has to be running and on. You plug this into it and it will continue to power the laptop for the equivalent as if you had completely recharged the laptop. You won't see the percentage climb back up to 100 because you're pulling power from this battery, but it does last a long time. They're great. The new one has a PD port, which is a power delivery port. puts out a little bit more wattage than this. This is an older model. I'll put a link to all that stuff down below, but it charges via like just mini USB or whatever, but it's got a USB-C port on it. It's got a couple regular USB ports, and obviously USB-C to USB-C is great for me. One thing I wish the EOS R had is the ability to recharge the camera while tethered via the USB cable like the Sonys do. The EOS Rs don't do that, so I carry this guy with me. Gaff tape. Got this usually to hold on gels on my strobes, but could be used for holding down cables, could be used to tape back a drapery, it could be used to, I don't know, whatever you need. It's there. So gaff tape, doesn't matter that it's white, could be white, black, doesn't matter. Next thing is the Profoto A1. This is a ridiculously overpriced speed light by Profoto. It has a little detachable battery, which, you know, a lot of speed lights do these days. It works really good. It's got a magnetic little diffuser on top. Really doesn't do a whole lot that any other speed light does for a fraction of the price, except it works with my Profoto remote. So that's why I have this. I don't have any complaints about it. It works absolutely great. It's just really expensive. And if you're not using Profoto ecosystem, then I would say you can get a lot of similar options for a lot less money. If you are shooting with Profoto, you know, $1,000 will get you one of these guys. Next thing in here is the NEBO. This is a little light. It's got a magnet on the bottom. I can stick it on the side of my truck. I can see down in my bag, use both hands while I'm digging through the bag. It's got a couple different options for light. And so just allows me at night when I'm shooting twilights and that stuff to be able to actually see what's going on in the bag here and find what I'm looking for. Last thing in here is the lens pen. This is basically for cleaning my lenses. One of them cleans my little viewfinder eyepiece and stuff. There's a multitude of sizes in here. I don't use this that often, but if I do need to, I can clean my lenses on location. Cram this stuff back in here, and let's see, one more pocket over here. We got the headlamp. Again, at night, if I'm working at night, I can pop this baby on and I can move around and I can see what's in my bag or what's in the truck or whatever it is that I'm doing. If I'm climbing around under desks trying to tape up cables and things, this can come in handy. Little cheap thing from REI. Keep a battery charger in here. I don't think I've ever used it, but we carry one just in case. And then we have the filter system. This is the Lee filter system. This is their previous gen system. They have a new one out now called the Lee 100, Lee 100 filter system. They just came out with a hood for that system. And so I haven't picked it up yet because I was waiting for the hood to come out. Now that the hood is out, I'll go ahead and pick one up and try it out. We'll do a YouTube review and leave for you guys. But essentially, this is just a compendium hood that attaches to the camera lens with a little adapter ring. This threads onto the camera and then it clips into the compendium hood, and this keeps all the flare out of the camera. The other cool thing that this does, it has slots in it that will hold filters. This is a polarizing filter I can slide in, and then I can rotate this hood on the camera until I get the right axis to block out glare, hence the need for a polarizer. And then I also have some filters in here. This is a NiSi filter. This is a graduated ND. You can see it gets a little bit darker from the top to the bottom there. And I use this when I'm shooting exteriors and I want to darken the sky, but not the building necessarily. I can put that on and kind of knock down the sky an exposure or so. Actually, I think it's a couple of stops, but it'll knock the sky down and leave my building and my foreground and all that stuff nice and bright. So that is the Lee filter system that I use. And I believe that is everything inside the bag. And on the front of the bag, there's one little thing left. On the side of the bag, and that is this little case. I picked this up online somewhere. I don't know the brand of it. It's just a little folding rolling case, and I keep all of my different chargers and cables for like cell phones and things like that in here. Also have a HDMI cable with an adapter that I can plug in like a phone or an iPad via HDMI into the TV if I want to play movies or something in a hotel room or whatever. I have that here to do. So it's just nice to have all of the different chargers and plugs. Maybe even for one of your clients on set, they got a low battery on their phone or something and they need to charge it up. If you happen to be the hero with all of the right cables, then yeah, you. That is it for what's in my bag 2019. If you liked this video, give it a little thumbs up. If you haven't already, subscribe. You can find us on Instagram at Tony Roslund. And if you haven't checked out the podcast, jump on iTunes, Spotify, or Google and do that. I'm out. Questions, comments, that's it. Peace.